Good evening, afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. From On behalf of Aujaz Cybersecurity, we would like to welcome you to webinar, which is an insight into the real life red team assessments. To start with, let me introduce me and my colleague. So myself, Ashish, I am part of the Aujaz Cybersecurity, and I'm heading a security verification services practice, which essentially gives us services into the vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, red teaming, application security, and lot of stuff that we do. I have a Darshan Gangar with me, who is Middle East regional head, and he is a red team expert. So today we are going to talk about different breaches or impact that we have seen so far. Why red teaming is required, what is the red teaming, and how this particular red teaming activity is being done, and the major emphasis that we are going to give on the case studies. Towards the end, we are putting a floor on the question answer sessions, and just for the token of appreciation for first 5 questions, we are sharing some goodies as well. To start with, let me quickly summarize the data breaches. So in a cybersecurity, the data breaches are not new. Those are there in the industry so far, and this 2024 is also not an exception for that. Even if you see the first quarter itself, there were a large number of data breaches that has happened, and with the bigger logos as such, and a huge number of data got exfiltrated. And this is a usual scenario that is happening all across world. But when we talk about a data breach, there is a definitely a consequences to the data breaches, and those are multifold. It's not only the data is being stolen, but that damages the reputation, that is legal impacts are there, then financial implications are major, and nonetheless operational disruptions are also that we have seen because of these cyber attacks and the data breach, those that we have seen. And definitely nowadays IT become a core part of the business, and cybersecurity is a very essential part because of the attack surface has increased multifold. And that's the reason this particular breaches, their consequences are more important for the businesses now to even sustain. It's not of the not only just a growth, but from the sustenance point of view also, these particular aspects are more important. But when we talk about different solutions related to these attacks and the data breach and all, usually people are talking, yeah, then you perform the penetration testing or red teamings and all. But what we have observed is many times these particular terms are getting used in very interchangeable way, and that's the reason we thought that let us establish the first a very basic difference. What is the difference between a penetration testing and red teaming? So Darshan, what do you think? What are the differences between the penetration testing and red teaming? What are your thoughts?
Certainly, Ashish. Thank you for that quick introduction, and a very good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to all of you, whoever is joining from the various regions. So, Ashish, you pointed out correctly that red teaming and data breaches are interlinked, right? These data breaches that has happened, they are causing a lot of impact towards the organization, right? People have been performing penetration testing for so long. Still, there are various data breaches that are happening on day-to-day lives, right? So why is that? Is because people have not yet moved to the red team part of the world yet, or they are still using those penetration testing methodologies for doing a red team activity. When I talk about penetration testing, it is more focused oriented, or it is just basically scope oriented activity where I am just seeing one particular IP address and those services related to those IP addresses. Whereas if I talk about red teaming, It has more to do with their entire infrastructure. So just to give you an example, if I have to break into an IP, right, for a penetration testing activity, what I would try and do is I would try and exploit the services, try to find zero-day attacks, try to do some kind of damage to that particular IP using malwares, exploits, or something. However, when I talk about it from a red teaming perspective, it is more to do with I identify who is the IT owner or having access to that particular IP. I try to do some other kind of reconnaissance or other kind of areas through which I can directly or indirectly get access to that particular IP, right? If so, by simple principle, an attacker would look for someone with having administrative access to that particular IP. They would conduct a phishing a campaign on that particular user, right? Get their credentials and then get access to that particular application or service hosted on that particular IP. So this is a vast difference between the thinking of a penetration testing activity and a red team activity. So while doing a red team activity, the scope is the whole environment, the entire network, whereas for penetration testing, it would be restricted to something.
Yeah, well said, Darshan. Though we largely understand the difference between a PT and RT, red teaming, let us understand the red teaming in more details. The reason is still this particular term is very ambiguous in nature. So when we talk about a red teaming, what is a red teaming? What are your thoughts?
So correctly mentioned, ambiguous is the right analogy to mention here, because what I have seen is from organization to organizations, from people to people, the word red team can mean different things. Some of them get it confused with a lot of other services that are there, purple teaming, breach and attack simulation. Though all of these fall into the same category, right? It can mean anything for a particular person, and not all those definitions are wrong. Those are all the right definitions. So just to give you a brief summary from my perspective, what a red team means is very simple. Anything that an attacker can leverage to get into your organization, whether it is some attack or some uh, uh, scrapes or malwares that will allow them to get access to your internal network, break your internal network. That is a process of red teaming for me, right? That is as simple as that. There are various ways to conduct red team activities, right? Now I was talking about purple teaming, breach and attack simulation, and all those things, right? So red teaming can be ambiguous term, but there are various ways to do that, and that is why it becomes very ambiguous with the way we approach towards it. There is something called as full scale red teaming, which consists of external, internal, cloud, OT, IoT. Your every infrastructure that is part of your environment would be added as part of this particular red team exercise. We have assume breach scenarios. Suppose if you're not looking at a full scale red teaming, but only want to test your internal waters, or if you want to check if there is a zero-day attack, what would be my risk towards the internal network, or if someone has a third party access and that third party gets compromised, how will that affect my network? If someone wants to talk about physical attacks or insider breaches, rogue employees, so that is where we talk about assume breach scenarios. Goal based red teaming is where we talk about one particular target. Now suppose my particular target would be getting access to domain admin, right? Now though in full scale and assume breach also I can add it as part of my targets or one of the objectives, but in goal based that would be my focus, right? So anything I will do as part of this particular red team will solely be for the reason for getting access to the domain admin. I won't be trying to unearth other type of vulnerabilities in terms of in the way or in the path. If I'm able to find that, then that's okay, but not going outside of the my current scope of work. Lastly, coming to an approach driven red teaming, uh, as I said, there is red teaming, purple teaming, breach and attack simulation. People have various approaches, like it is a complete black box approach. They provide some domains and then they say that these are your scoped activities. So it can be customized towards the customer's requirement. It can be customized towards the requirement of what is in scope and what is supposed to be tested. So that briefly gives you understanding of what a red team activity is all about.
Yeah, Darshan. Yeah, thanks for sharing your thoughts on the red teaming. While we understand what is a red teaming, still there are areas that do we really need this particular red teaming activity? Because when it comes to the business, it is really need to understand whether it is really translated into the business value. And as Darshan has rightly mentioned, there are a lot of loopholes those are there in the organization. And before the attacker is trying to figure out those particular attacks, uh, if we unearth those particular vulnerabilities, if those particular loopholes can be unearthed upfront, then those particular issues can be mitigated. So overall, the industry itself are moving from the reactive to the proactive, and red teaming is one of the proactive approach to address such particular issues. A lot of organizations are doing these activities not only just for the compliance regulatory perspective, but they really wanted to strengthen their security postures, and then that is where the need arises. um, I know that many of the audience here from the security fraternity, they are near, they know that defining a security ROI is very difficult, and such activities like red teaming will definitely help in understanding where we place on the defense part, and the tool services that those that organization has invested is really worth, and these particular investments are getting tested, validated, and that is where this red teaming is more important. Moreover, we always say that people is the weakest link from the uh, standpoint, and this employee awareness is more important. So this phishing attacks is one of the integral part of the red teaming activities, which also that we test, and this is where this particular 360-degree view is getting addressed when we go for the red teaming. Now, while we see that why it is required, what is a red teaming and all, but it is better that if we can see how this particular red teaming is being done. So, Darshan, do you wanted to share your quick snapshot on how this particular red teaming is being done?
So when I talk about the red team methodology, right, there are lots of things that come into my mind when I want to express this thing, right? Basically, Maitre attack framework. I don't know if most of you guys already know this, but Maitre attack is one of the standard frameworks, which is a collection of all the techniques, tactics, and procedures, which are nothing but the attacks that these APT groups or the hackers that they are performing on government organizations, private organizations. So whatever these attacks are, they have been collated into techniques, tactics, and procedures, and then they have been accumulated into one place that is called the Maitre attack framework, which details out list in terms of the entire cyber kill chain, starting from external reconnaissance towards initial access, execution, privilege escalation, lateral movement, credential access, defense evasion, persistence, and of course, getting the impact out of it is exfiltrating the sample data out of the network, or doing some financial transaction for banks, or compromising supply chain attacks. So these are more or less the entire cyber kill chain, how we perform the entire red team activity. So we start from the external, where we do all the reconnaissance, and we move into a cyber kill chain, and all these stages that I just mentioned, these are interchangeable. So suppose if I get directly access to one particular user, okay, so I might do a lateral movement first and then do a privilege escalation to a domain admin, or in some cases I need to do a privilege escalation first and then do a lateral movement. So these stages are interchangeable, but the underlying principle or the techniques, tactics, or procedures that I just mentioned, they all remain the same that we use from the Maitre attack framework. That is the base for it. But again, as I mentioned, there are some scenarios where you have to be very logical. You have to think how the attacker would do. It's not proper exploits or 0 days that you would have to perform every time. You have to find logical flaws, and that is what I will be detailing in the case studies, which is what we have been gathered here for, right? I will explain how those case studies display what a real world attacker would do. Talking all these things about all the technical jargons and everything, it's well and good. Everybody can talk about that, but getting insight into the real world scenarios, getting to see how a bank's environment can be compromised or how a government entity can be compromised, that is something that will actually tell you how the red teams are performed.
Indeed, I think that is more important aspect, Darshan, because these particular frameworks are good. Those are there since long, but the real-time experiences, real-world experiences are more important. So I think why can't you start with one of the case studies that we had with one of the Indian banks, largest Indian banks?
So, talking about one of the largest Indian banks, I just wanted to understand, like this particular case study. Okay, when we did this for this particular bank, it was compliance requirement by the RBI. So basically, what was happening was every year RBI had governed that a red team needs to be performed. Right now, this particular bank has been doing this activity for last 6-7 years, and this time they wanted to do something very different. Right, so they approached August and they mentioned this to us that okay, we have very particular objectives in mind. First is to compromise our VPN VDI infrastructure, get initial access to the internal network. Second is getting access to the after getting access to the internet network, getting access to the domain admin credentials, doing a financial transaction, dummy transaction, of course. Then getting access to their VPC consoles as administrators, right? So these were some of the objectives that were defined. They wanted a unique approach towards this assessment. So what we did is at the start, we started with a lot of reconnaissance work. Now, reconnaissance is the foundation of any activity. When I say any activity is not just related to a red team attack, when we talk about web application network or any sort of penetration testing activities or any sort of configuration reviews, or if you're doing a maturity assessment, reconnaissance is the key part to it. Unless you have all the information, you won't be able to map out or chalk out all the particular details of that particular how an attack can be formed. You won't be able to create a threat profile, attack surfaces, attack vectors without having a proper information, right? And that is how we start any activity. Basically, we get all the details of breach credentials in the past using the dark web, deep web. We try and get access to all the publicly available domains, applications, getting access to their which type of technologies are being used, which VPN profiles are being used, what is basically their organizational structure, who are the key folks in their organization. So these are very vital information. Why I say vital is generally we use this information to create a correlation of attacks. How we do that is basically for this particular activity, one of the goals, as I mentioned, was to get access to their VPN VDI network, right? So to get to their VPN network, we identified there is one application. Of course, all the VDI VPNs are supposed to be externally accessible, right? And it has to be publicly accessible because your employee can join from any domain. So same was the case. We identified that this URL is allowing us to get access to their VDI VPN server, and it has credentials for it, right? So the first activity that we need to do is get access to those credentials. We use the dark web engine to get leaked credentials in the past. We use the phishing credentials. We run a phishing campaign, and we were able to get access to those key credentials who had access to the network, right? Who had access to their VPN SSO credentials, right? So we used those credentials, we logged in, and not to our surprise, there was a two-factor authentication, of course. So it is generally recommended to have a multi-factor authentications for such kind of logins. Now, as part of the second activity that if we wanted to get in, we had to bypass or circumvent the two-factor authentications. How we did that, we use the reconnaissance. So basically, generally how it happens is, once we are performing a red team activity, we chalk out all the information at one particular location. Okay, whatever we have done as part of the reconnaissance activity, we gather it, and then we try to correlate what exactly would be applicable at what places. So using that, we identified there is another application, right, which is hosting a basically a two-factor authentication reset application. So when I say two-factor authentication reset, if I have the right set of credentials, that is the ID and password, right? I log in into that application, I can reset my own two-factor authentication. Now, logically speaking, this is a major breach of their authorization framework. We all talk about authentication, right? There is a authentication happening here, right? I am logging into the application, I have the right password, but there is no authorization check whether I am authorized to reset that two-factor authentication. That question was never asked while they initially designed that particular application or the entire flow of their data flow, right? So this was a major business logic flaw. It is again a very low hanging fruit. It is a misconfiguration at the bank's end. It is something that cannot be identified just by a web application or a PT exercise. Again, to dwell down into what is the difference is that for my PT, I would not have checked the VDI application, or I would not have got access to the usability of those two-factor authentication reset. Whereas when I'm doing a PT for that particular application, that two-factor authentication reset is not part of my scope. So I'm not basically having an overview of the entire infrastructure. This is how we were able to circumvent the two-factor authentication, get inside their internal network. Once we got inside their internal network, right, then again we had to get access to domain admin. We had to do a dummy transfer. We had to get access to their cloud networks, right? So generally, what we do once we get inside the network is very simple. We try to again do a lot of reconnaissance. So now internal reconnaissance is done based on domain, endpoint, and network. These are the three pillars of discovery, reconnaissance, whatever you call in terms of internal reconnaissance. With respect to domain, we identified there were a lot of domain groups, privilege groups. There were some groups which had Swift users, core banking server users, cloud administrators. So you generally name your domain groups in that naming convention, right? So that is why we were able to identify the Swift users and all those things. In terms of endpoint, we identified that there was a privilege escalation available for one of their PAM solution that was implemented, right? So generally you implement PIM, PAM solutions, IAM solutions for an extra layer of security. What if those are misconfigured? What if they are not properly configured? Have you validated those controls? So that is why a red team would uncover these kind of control validation checks. And we did that. We identified PAM was misconfigured. We were able to do a privilege escalation to a local administrator. Using that local administrator on the network level reconnaissance, we identified where are the key servers where the administrators are logging in, right? The administrators that we found. We went on to that servers using the local administrators password, the exploit of privilege escalation. And we were able to harvest those credentials using tools like Mimikatz and other credential harvesting techniques. So the point being, this particular methodology that we did, it is plain and simple for an attacker, right? But for an organization, it is like you'll have to have defenses or controls at each step. You have to have prevention as well as detection controls. During the entire activity that we did here, there were very few detections that were made, right? Even if there was alerts raised, it was not correlated to their security team, SOC team, right? And those were not effective enough to block that particular attack chain, right? So getting access to local administrators, what we did as part of the further red teaming, see, for me to get access to a Finacle server or a Swift server, right, or maybe any other core banking servers, it is very simple. I would try to identify who are the core users who have access to those particular servers. Then I'll see if there is a way I can get SOP documents, how they are logging into that particular server. If I can get access to their systems, find more documents, get their email boxes, get the share folders where all these details are already mentioned. So this is what a real world attacker would do. So exploitation, breaking the Finacle application, breaking the SIF application, it's not going to be part of their scope. Their scope is going to be very simple. It is get those SOP documents, get the understanding how things work, right, within the environment. Again, it takes a lot of time. And that's why any attack life cycle that you will see, they sit in your environment for almost 6 to 8 months. They understand each and everything that is happening in your organization. And that is later on when they have the entire map, how they will do an actual attack, they will conduct that attack. So that is what we did as well. We did not wait for 6 months or so. It took us almost 2.5 months to get to this kind of access where we were able to get access to domain admin privileges. But now once we have the domain admin privileges, it took us just 1.5 week or 2 weeks of activity to get access to their core banking servers, bypass two-factor authentication using the same principle that we had for the external bypass. Basically, what we identified was the IT team was using a IT administration tool, which is nothing but one of their core applications which can shadow people's machine, right? So we use that to shadow key people's machine. We got access to global administrators on Azure. We were able to use SSO to get access to AWS consoles. We were able to use this particular to get access to their Finacle servers. We bypassed the radius authentications because we are able to register our own tokens, right? So that is how basically the entire life cycle went for this particular client, right? We got access to a lot of PII data. We had access to do a dummy transaction. We did a dummy transaction along with the bank's help, right? And that is what I wanted to highlight from a brief perspective. When you are doing a real world attack, right, the attackers will only need one gate or one door to be open, whereas you have to protect 1,000 doors, 1,000 attack surfaces within your organization, right? So this misconfigurations, low hanging fruits, which are not generally identified during any web application scanning or penetration testing, like open share folders, having domain credentials or some privileged credentials, some other kind of basic misconfigurations for, as we saw for PAM, right? In this particular case, these are something that needs to be validated. Those need to be tested. Just installing a security solution or just having some policies will not ensure 100% defense in depth. And that is where we are focusing on getting a red team being done. So that's all, Ashish, on the first part of the case study. Ashish, you're on mute, I guess. I think.
Yeah, I'm saying that yeah, this is good, Darshan. Thanks for sharing. When we talking about a red teaming uh, for the bank within India, there are different aspects that you unearthed and uh, shared the different layers where you tried an attack and how it works. But as we see globally, there are different regions that we support, and every region has their own dynamics. So my request to you, if you can share some insight for the work that we have done for the Middle East region also, because every region's dynamics are different, and then the approach, that attack techniques that differ region to region.
Yes, certainly. So, Ashish, when, as you correctly pointed out, right, from region to region, the dynamics are different. There are various trends that various regions follow, right? For this particular government organizations that we did red teaming for, right? They had invested heavily into security solutions, right? Again, coming back to my basic point, investing into security solutions, does it really secure your environment, right? That is where this particular case study opens the floodgates and gives you a brief overview about what needs to be done exactly, right? How to basically protect against real world advisories. Is it enough to have a reliance on technology, or do you need some kind of manual efforts to be complemented, or there should be a balance between a manual or automated things, right? So basically, when we did the red team for this particular government organization, okay, the scope was very simple, right? They had two domain active directories. One was a DMZ active directory, one was their active directory, internal active directory, their main domain where they are logging in their for all the users and employees, right? So what the scope was, they wanted us to first get access to their DMZ network, okay, get access to DMZ domain administrator, and then further get access to the internal active directory, somehow compromised from the DMZ network, right? So what we did was, right, we started doing a lot of, again, coming back to the core principles, doing a lot of reconnaissance. We identified there was one of the applications, that is Jenkins, I would say. So they have implemented a complete DevSecOps pipeline, right? For this DevSecOps pipeline, they have a CI/CD tool or solution, that is Jenkins, right? Which was externally available for their QA and development teams, right? However, this particular solution was having default credentials. Now, I cannot emphasize enough, and I have reiterated to n number of clients, be it a Fortune 500 companies or be it some kind of small scale or large scale companies, everyone has faced this particular problem, that when we get default products, when we get some particular applications, we tend to keep the passwords weak or default, right? So emphasizing on weak and default is because these are the actual leeways or entry points for any attacker into the network. Once we use this particular default credentials, we got access to their entire source code repositories. We got access to their entire application codes. We got access to a lot of things, one of which was a key, basically. So there was lots of things in that particular Jenkins application. But the key things that I wanted to point out, and just highlighting the few vulnerabilities, we found a key that led us to the AWS network, right? So they were using a cloud key, right, to do a console authentication, the shell authentication, command line authentication, right? So we use this key to again create a new user within the AWS, console user within the AWS, okay? And we were able to log in into the AWS console with this new user. With this new user, what we observed was this particular key was misconfigured and it had a very high privilege. So it was able to add us to multiple IAM roles, right? It could allow us access to multiple OUs. So initially, when we got access to this particular new user, we are part of only one OU within that entire AWS infrastructure. But since we had the privileges, we could add this particular user to other OUs as well, right? So we added ourselves to different OUs within the AWS. We got access to their entire EC2 instances, S3 buckets, their entire AWS infrastructure. It was access equivalent to a root user. Sorry. So it was an access that was equivalent to a root user within the AWS console, right? Which basically gives us a perspective. People have adopted to cloud, right? But they have not yet understood the core principles of security into the cloud. They have not started configuring cloud. They do not use the core principles that have been defined in the past. Principle of least privilege, zero trust, security by design. If we talk about defense in depth, so all these jargons that I keep talking about, right, you would have heard on day-to-day basis. What they actually mean can be seen in this particular case study, that those were not missing in this particular example. We use this particular AWS access to showcase those misconfigurations, right? Coming back to the getting access to the DMZ Active Directory. So during our red teaming, we also identified another application, which was one of their main websites. Okay. On this main website, because they have been doing a lot of testing regularly, okay, it should have caught this particular vulnerability, which is an SQL injection, right? Now, generally, SQL injections can be identified by any dashed automation solutions, right? But what we identified was, at this particular stage, though they were using or conducting multiple dashed authentications, they were not able to identify the dash scans. They were not able to identify this particular vulnerability. Just excuse me for a moment. So I was saying they were not able to identify this particular vulnerability. Using a manual approach or the techniques that we observed, we saw that they were having a one particular JavaScript file, right? On this JavaScript file, they were calling a JSON function, which was intent calling a database query, right? We use this particular JSON call to perform a SQL injection using manual techniques. They had WAF, they had IPS, but we were able to bypass those controls just because we had a core principle knowledge about how to do a proper manual penetration testing. Again, this gives you a very brief perspective that having a total reliance on automated solutions, though they have a vast coverage, they have their own pluses. I'm not saying that you should only rely on manual pen testing. Automation is also required as much as a manual pen testing, but this shows why a manual pen test is required. We identified this SQL injection bug, which allowed us to get shell access to their DMZ server, because again, there was a misconfiguration, right? Just to highlight very few minor details on this SQL injections, we got access to almost 2000 records, right? Those 2000 records we're able to dump from their main website. They are using this one particular vulnerability. This might have been already exploited by some attacker. We never know, right? So while we found it, when we found this particular vulnerability, it might not have been too late, or it might have been too late. But the good thing was, once we identified it, they fixed it quickly. However, we had already got on to the next level, that we got access to their DMZ server using shell access. Once we got access to their DMZ server, which was again running with highest privileges, right? We were able to do a lot of credential stuffing attacks. Because of the misconfigurations, we were able to do a lateral movement to their other servers in their network, right? What happened was, these servers which were running in the DMZ network, right? One of the servers had domain admin credentials. We used a lot of the already high privilege user to get access to that particular server. We got access to the credential memory, and the credential memory allowed us access to the domain admin user. Getting access to the domain admin user allowed us to breach the trust relationship between the two domains, the internal domain and the DMZ domain. When you have multiple domains within your forest, right, Active Directory forest, you tend to do a lot of things that will make your job easier, right? Security, functionality, and availability. These are the triads. This is a triangle, right? If you have more functionality implemented, it will hamper your security, right? It will allow you availability, but it will hamper your security. Similarly, if you implement more controls, it will restrict the functionalities. It will make sure that the user who's logging in will have to get through multiple controls, or it will make the job difficult for your customers, but it will ensure some particular sense of security. So there has to be a balance between security, availability, and functionality, right? That is very key here, and that is what was missing. They had availability and functionality. They had open trust relationship between the two domains, which we exploited. We use attacks like DC sync, generic write to get access to internal Active Directory, right? Inside the internal Active Directory, there were other findings that we identified, one of which was key sensitive information in share folders, having misconfigured user permissions. So lots of things, the weak network segmentations, their admin user or their admin group was part of the same user segment, which was hosting their normal user segments, back office users, right? So these are some of the key findings that we were able to find for this particular exercise. That is where I would want to stop here. I would want to throw back this entire discussion towards Ashish and everyone on the call, right? And
Yeah.
would want to understand what kind of understanding you require, or if any questions you have.
Yeah, I think this is a very good, insightful case study, Darshan, that you shared. Definitely, now everybody has realized that despite we have a lot of technology solutions in place, but a single or a simple SQL injection kind of vulnerabilities can be exploited and get into the data breach, which I discussed very first even when we start this particular discussion. So yes, I think that is where though we have a lot of automated solutions in place, but still there are the techniques and different manual techniques are more important to unearth those vulnerabilities and figure out before the attackers are doing that. I think this is where we would like to also take a pause and would like to open the floor for the questions. And just to remind that as a token of appreciation, we'll share goodies for the first 5 questions. Any questions?
I was just going through the Q&A and I found a couple of very good questions that I would want to discuss. So first
Sure.
question that I see in the chat is, how can we protect against risk from third-party vendors? What type of red teaming activity can be performed to ensure we do not have a risk from third-party connections within the network, right? So to highlight this question, right? What generally happens as part of third-party networks, right? You tend to have some kind of VPN connection that you provide to the third-party networks, or you have contractors or subcontractors within your organization whom you provide certain kind of access to, right? So the key principle here in terms of security, right? I would first talk about the defensive approaches, and then I'll talk about how we can offensively work on this angle, right? So generally how it works is we generally talk about having a separate segment created for third-party connections, having a proper firewall access, restricting only ports that should be accessible whitelisted towards those particular connections. We talk about having a separate laptop configuration for those third-party vendors, having least access on web accesses, internet access, whatever you have, getting them into some context-based restrictions along with the proper segmentation related restrictions, right, on the AD level as well. So these are some of the ways to defend against the third-party breaches, right? Coming to how we perform a red team assessment along to that, right? So basically, when I do a red teaming, if you give me access, least privilege access, again, we can come back to the principle of goal-based scenarios or assume breach approach. where you will give me a least privilege access to your third party network. You give me that laptop which has you have been providing to any subcontractor or any third party employee within your organization. You provide me access to that particular segment where the third party is making connection to your environment, right? In that network, in that segmentation. And from that network, I start doing a lot of initial reconnaissance, and that will be my initial access or starting vector to see how far I can get into the network. Now, the basic principles of red teaming will remain the same, right? I will still do a lot of reconnaissance. I'll still do a lot of different techniques, tactics, procedures to identify if I can get access to share folders, if I can access to misconfigurations, applications within the network, and all those things. So that principle will remain the same, but that is
Correct.
how it will be different from the
Yeah,
third party.
and whether it is for the organization or the third party, in any of the cases, we do take authorization letters, which is important, because this is all an ethical activities that we do, and that is where uh, is more important when we perform such activities.
Right. Coming to the next question, Ashish, what will be more effective, red team or a purple teaming assessment? Right. Uh,
Yeah, actually, mm, they have their own advantages or pros and cons. We can say you can also add Darshan, but in my view, when we talk about red teaming, it's more performing an attack, and when we go for the purple teaming, it is more hand in hand. Uh, you perform an attack, and at the same time, this particular defense is getting uh, validated, established, and check whether the defense is in proper phase or not. I think purple teaming is getting introduced lately in an industry. It's not that popular, but it's gaining a traction now. When we talk about from the different goals that we discussed earlier, the different approaches, if your goal or the organization goal is more to upright the posture, strengthen the posture, definitely this purple teaming is an good activity where you can think of having an attack as well as defense at the same time. But as I mentioned, it is more scenario based, that what the organization objectives are, what they wanted to do, and accordingly we can choose them.
Correct. And Ashish, you very beautifully crafted that answer. I could not have said it better. It depends upon organization to organization, their current scope of work, where they are in their current security maturity level. It defines how to do a red teaming, or what is the scope of red teaming and what is purple teaming. For an advice for any organization, I generally give, start with a red team assessment, get an overall understanding where you need to put your major focus upon, because red teaming, while it is a very good thing, while it covers your entire security posture, it might not actually in terms of coverage identify 100% of your vulnerabilities, right? So it will give you a brief perspective where you need to prioritize your efforts. And for the second assessment, maybe you can do a proper purple teaming activity where your SOC team is also involved, and the SOC team will also know. So red team, the SOC, you test the effectiveness of the SOC team, right? Whether your SOC was able to detect or not. And in purple teaming, you will actually sit with the SOC team and then do that proper control validation. You will do the proper testing, right? In terms of which use cases are missing, what controls more need to be implemented or evaluated. So those all things would make more sense after a red team assessment, and you know where to focus upon. Because again, purple teaming will be very focused approach towards one particular goal. We cannot do a purple teaming maybe in 1 month for your entire organization, right? That will be very fast. Coming to the next question, Ashish, I mean, we are getting a lot of questions. I'm sorry if we won't be able to answer all of them, but I'll try and cover as many as possible and as fast as possible. Which environment is better suited for red teaming tools and toolkits like C2 servers, Cobalt Strike, GoFish, a cloud-based setup, or a physical system? Now that depends, right? If I talk about organizations that I have done a red teaming for, right? The main aim here is once you get initial access or once you have a connection inside the network, how would you get your tools within that network? If you already are inside the network, okay, if the USB access and everything is blocked, of course you'll have to rely on cloud things. If suppose by somehow you will be able to get access to the physical systems, or change settings on the physical systems, enable BIOS based USB block or something like that, then of course those are good in that particular sense. Again, on cloud servers, right, it is also reliant on what kind of web proxy is enabled, what kind of settings are enabled, what kind of blocks have been implemented. So for one of the exercises, what we found, they had enabled their entire AWS whitelist. They have whitelisted entire AWS segment because their applications were hosted on AWS server. So what we did was, because AWS was whitelisted, we did not host anything on Azure or any other cloud servers, or nor we hosted it on our own C2 server, where we have it hosted in our CDC or just CDC, which is in Bangalore and Mumbai. So we did not use those particular IPs as well. What we simply did was we host this particular C2 network on AWS. It was easy to download tools, transfer data between the networks, and this AWS segment was entirely owned by Aegis at that time, right? So again, it depends. You need to evaluate what kind of access you have, and then you need to talk about, but you need to be ready for all the scenarios, whether it is physical, whether it is cloud. In cloud also there will be multiple scenarios.
Yeah, I
How
think
to
in the interest of time, Darshan, I think we can take more questions so we can
yeah,
brief on the responses, and then we can connect to the individuals again on a
correct,
one-on-one to get a more to provide a more insight. Yeah, I think you
correct.
can go with the next question.
How to avoid social engineering attacks? Now, to avoid social engineering attacks, there are lots of, again, use a combination of technology, people, and process. So technology, you need to have email gateways to protect against phishing, brand protection. There are lots of solutions already available. You do a control validation with using a breach and attack simulation solution. Manual efforts can also be done. In terms of process, you need to have those alerts generated. You need to have proper plugins involved in your installed in your Outlook, so that people can report the phishing incidents, or can make IT administrators aware about these kind of things. The documents need to be defined, what kind of actions need to be taken for IT administrator when they identify IOC, right? In terms of people, training, user awareness, of course.
Correct.
Moving on to the next question,
Because
what is
prevention, when we talk about a social engineering prevention, still there are no mechanisms, because wherever the human is involved, we need to educate human, and those trainings has to done frequently. But to assess the maturity of the security within team, that's where this phishing simulation has to be done, and accordingly the trainings has to be carried out. That is what the Darshan has shared. Yeah, Darshan, go ahead.
uh, again, nothing is 100% foolproof, not even technology, not even people. Good
Absolutely.
highlighted, Ashish.
Yes.
What if the organization has already experienced a major breach? How will you adjust your strategy? So we have done assessments for organizations who have recently faced breach, right? They heightened their security, and then they gave us again to test controls. Strategy does not change much, right? If I talk about attack scenarios, the basic principle or the logic remains the same, right? Any red team, all the red teams that I have done, right, in the past, none of them have the same approach, none of them have the same strategy. If you ask me, all those red teams have been different in some form or the other. I might have got access to some kind of servers, or I might have done some defense evasion, which cannot be used in the same way for the other organization. So generally speaking, in that terms, all the particular assessments are different. For the ones which have been recently breached, I would try to again carve out what are the from the reconnaissance that I do, from the data available to me, what is the best attack scenario, what is the best attack path. So that threat profiling and creating that attack path, that is important. Moving on to next question quickly. Okay. While red team is essential for any business, can you help define the direct ROI to drive the initiative for any industry? Okay. Now, let me talk about something that is non-financial. Okay. If I talk about manufacturing for per se, right? And I see that question also. So manufacturing industry, right? If I want to convince my CXOs or if I want to convince my board that a red team is important, right? Simple thing is, if an attacker is able to get access to a manufacturing network, right? Apart from data leakage, there can be supply chain attacks, there can be espionage attacks by your competitors or some other rogue employees or disgruntled employees, right? Uh, what happens generally is, suppose if I am a manufacturing chain and someone has attacked into my network and stopped the production, or they have done some DDoS that will hamper my production, right? It will severely impact my brand image as well. It will have various financial implications to me, right? Again, it will hamper with my day-to-day operations. Okay. There will be a lot of chaos within the environment, right? Again, supply chain tampering and all those things are the same example. But from a manufacturing point of view, this needs to be highlighted, what the risk are, what the impact is, right? uh, if suppose someone gets access to any of your servers, that does not mean that only someone is going to target a bank or a financial entity or it is money driven. It can be some other impact, or there can be some other objective towards getting access to that server, right?
Correct.
So that
To add
is
on
what.
to add on to what Darshan has mentioned, see, in one of the slides we earlier saw that the needs of the red teaming, and when we are working across globe with a cross section of the industries, right from the listed companies to the startups, everybody is looking this particular aspect more from the proactive security standpoint. So convincing a board is more easy to get a budgets, because you never know, the next day you will get attacked, and the way Darshan has mentioned, either your operations are stalled or your reputation is on stake, and then it is evoked. So instead of having a breach and then doing the post-mortem and forensic, it is always better to go with the red teaming, and that is where the always propositions that the CISOs, CXOs are putting to the board, because when you have a reputational damage, that is a multiple damage, and to recover from the business standpoint, and that is where these particular activities are more important.
Correct. Few more questions, Ashish. I am sure people are keen to get those answers. In a red team exercise, how do we focus layer by layer or controls by controls? Okay. So again, when I talked about the entire cyber kill chain, right? There are lots of TTPs that are available. I talked about MITRE attack framework. So when we or just as an organization does the red teaming, we try to cover each and every tactic and procedure that is part of the MITRE attack framework, right? Apart from the original objectives, goals, and I see one question: what are the key metrics or basically measure success measures for engagements? So the success measures and key metrics would be the same, right? To get to those objectives, do a proper control validation, get basically proper validation of TTPs. So these are generally how we do the red teaming, what focuses we have in terms of each tactics or techniques or procedures, or I would say the phases of cyber kill chain, how we define the key metrics or success criteria, right? So either it is some kind of impact, either it is some kind of uh, the access that we get.
Yeah. I think can we take one or two more questions, and then probably we
Yeah.
can stop. Yep. Darshan, go ahead.
Uh, one of the crucial parts of any red teaming is to check controls effectiveness of security mechanism. My question is, what can be best generic methodology to evade EDR or XDR? Now, okay, talking about technologies per se, right, or techniques per se, there are lots of ways of bypassing a EDR. The basic and the most successful one that I've been able to do is disable that altogether, right? The previous age antiviruses, when I started this particular activity, or when I started doing a red team activity, right, there was no EDR solutions. We could easily disable AV protection if I had access to administrators. Nowadays, there are lots of other controls that prevent us from doing that. There are still ways that you can disable. So there are ways to disable trend micro. If you're able to escalate your privileges to NT authority, using that NT authority, you need to kill the service or process that is running, and then disable that service. If at all it allows you to do so. If suppose again that is blocked at a driver level, what you can do is you can identify which drivers are actually blocking that, disable that from the driver level. How you identify those driver levels is basically you will need to do a lot of reconnaissance research into these products that we are using. The other common techniques that are there is getting into a safe mode, and then you're using safe mode to disable the uh, antiviruses. Again, that is
Various
also
services.
now,
Yeah.
yeah, again, that is also now they've been stopped you by Windows 11. It does not allow you to boot into, say, safe mode without administrative credentials. Then there are other ways like signature modification, or there are other ways like changing the functions or the code type, doing obfuscation, encryption of your entire source code. So there are various ways to do that, right? And it depends upon the current level of approach. If you go to the MITRE attack framework, and if you go to the defense evasion part of it, you will find 40 to 50 different techniques. You need to do a lot of research. Red teaming is not a one-day game. You will need to identify the key subjects. Then you need to do a lot of research how actually it is being done by the APT group, hackers, the real world red teamers. Then you will be able to do that.
I think Darshan, let's take a last question and we'll stop here for today.
Sure, Ashish. Quickly, I am just finding something that is not already answered. Very simple question. What is the typical timelines for conducting a full-scale red team assessment? Right now, it depends on organization to organization, goal to goal, objective to objective. So we have deployed dedicated consultants for organizations that are working on TNM and annuity basis. Throughout the year, they are performing some attack vectors. They do actional attack every 6 months, and for internal attacks they test various scenarios as per the calendar activities, right? We have defined that framework. There are short-term engagements which are time bound, 2 months, 1 month, 3 months. Again, objective to objective. Suppose you are only looking at external red teaming and internal red teaming as a full-scale approach, one-time assessment we generally recommend for 6 to 8 weeks is a minimum, because that will allow us to perform the entire MITRE attack framework line by line, get access to lots of information about your domain as well. It takes time to learn a domain, right? So it might not be as effective, but it focuses on the key points, basically on the identifying where your major missing controls are, and then the next assessments that we do, that can be more focused on those areas.
Yeah, so I think in a nutshell, it takes around minimum 6 weeks. It can go to 10 to 12 weeks also. Depends on the scope, and then we can carve out specific scope, what that particular organization wanted to do. But these are the typical timelines, and the way Darshan has mentioned, the approach also, whether it is one time or a recurrent that we wanted to do. Those are the remaining aspects. But yeah, happy to connect separately on some of these aspects. So I think with this, we would like to end this particular webinar. Thanks for your responses or overwhelming support for this. Thanks, Darshan, for providing an insight, and wish you all happy rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you so much.